The Assam tea of the East India Company sits steeping in a porcelain cup. A bold, malty, almost earthy scent fills the air. You lift the cup to your lips. Steam dances across your face, expecting the light, floral notes that fueled England's obsession. Instead, what greets your palate is harsh, astringent, and sooty, a brew too rough to be called refined. You set the cup down. Unfit! The word reaches the East India Company like a death sentence. All their efforts, the plantations in Assam, the careful cultivation, the hope that Indian soil could rival China's mountains, and still the tea falls short. They now know what they must do: take what is not theirs, what was cultivated through generations in China, the secrets of tea. Welcome to Botanical Echoes, a podcast exploring the myth, lore, and history surrounding plants. I'm Caleb, your host. A few announcements before I get into the episode. I'm excited to announce that we've reached 100 listeners. I appreciate everyone who listens, and I'm excited to watch it grow more. While researching this episode, I created a tea blend that I really enjoy. It's a mix of 4 bags of Yogi Spice Blackberry Focus, 2 bags of Yogi Sweet Tangerine Positive Energy, and 2 bags of Yogi Vanilla Spice Perfect Energy, steeped for 5 minutes in a half-gallon pitcher. Fair warning, this blend is very high in caffeine. Please use caution when drinking it. I will put the recipe in the show notes. If you try it, let me know what you think. This is a multi-part series. If you haven't listened to part 1, The Great Tea Heist, How England Stole China's Treasure, I encourage you to start there. For a quick recap, in the last episode, Robert Fortune returned from his first expedition to China, where he explored the newly opened treaty ports after the Opium War and sent exotic plants back to England. We ended with the East India Company discovering they could grow tea in the hills of Assam, but Britain's top tea tasters deemed it unfit, so the company became determined to steal the knowledge of tea making from China. It had been 3 years since Robert Fortune's return from China. In that time, he published his book and had been appointed curator of the Chelsea Physic Gardens, founded in 1673, located in London. This garden still exists today and is the living archive to the exotic and medicinal plants of the world. Fortune quickly became an advisor on what plants could be exploited for Western markets, how cash crops could be improved through selection and hybridization, where a plant would grow best in order to maximize crop yield, and how to process plants for market distribution. One trip to China had made him one of the most influential botanists in Britain. The Chelsea Physic Gardens was likely the highest position he could ever hope to achieve, and he feared it would be his last adventure. But on May 7th, 1848, that fear would be proven wrong. Dr. John Forbes Royal, a horticultural advisor to the East India Company, visited Fortune with a proposition. The company had a problem. They attempted to grow Camellia sinensis from seeds imported from China, but seeds don't guarantee identical offspring, and every attempt to transplant living tea plants failed. The long voyage, the salt air, the storms, it killed all the plants before they reached India. But Royal read Fortune's reports. Buried in them was mention of something Royal knew could change everything: the Wardian case. The original terrarium, a simple frame of metal or wood and glass panels, a sealed ecosystem. If the plants inside had moisture and sunlight, they thrived. No watering, no exposure to salt spray or freezing winds. Fortune had used them to bring back dozens of living specimens from China when others failed. Royal offered Fortune a salary of £500 a year, 4 times what he earned on his first trip, plus the rights to bring back any plants he wished with full property rights. This was more than a salary. It's the botanical equivalent of copyrights. He had say in who could sell or propagate these plants, typically requiring others to obtain a license. He even had rights to royalties when someone else sold that plant. It was the chance to build an empire. right in the middle of England's plant craze, and all the company asked was that he sneak into the heart of China, collect tea plants, learn how to grow and process them properly, keep them alive, and deliver them to India. Fortune had much to consider. Accepting meant leaving his home, his prestigious position, and his wife Jane and their young children, for another 3 years in a country that had nearly killed him the first time. But after careful thought, he agreed. On May 17th, the company sent a letter. He was expected to be ready to depart no later than June 20th, 34 days. But on June 20th, Fortune stood on the docks of Southampton, awaiting a steamship. He spent nearly 2 months at sea aboard the Braganza, named perhaps for the Portuguese princes who had started England's tea craze, and on August 14th, 1848, he arrived in Hong Kong. Taking in the sights and wonders of Hong Kong, Fortune knew there would be nothing there for him. His mission was to secure the finest tea China had to offer. While Fortune knew from his first trip that green tea and black tea came from the same plant, the processing methods were completely different, and each region guarded its secrets closely. He would split his mission into 2 trips, one for green tea and one for black tea, each grown in different regions. He would begin in the Huijiao region, home to the Huangshan Mountains and China's finest green teas. But gaining access to Huijiao would not be easy. After the Opium War, foreign presence in China had grown, but so did resentment towards outsiders. Foreigners were being captured, held hostage, or killed. Fortune contemplated sending hired men to collect plants for him, but feared they would go to the nearest plantations, not the best ones. So while in Shanghai, his first stop, he ordered the construction of Wardian cases, gathered supplies, and hired 2 servants from the region of Huizhou. They would be his interpreters, cooks, guides, and if necessary, his shields. One of these men was Wang, a well-educated man in his early 20s, raised in the green tea regions by a family who had grown and picked tea for generations. He knew the roads, spoke pidgin, a blend of English, Chinese, Portuguese, and Hindi, and understood tea. He was invaluable. The other man Fortune simply called the coolie, a 19th century term for a porter or laborer. He was strong, local, and familiar with the terrain Fortune needed to cross. The men procured a boat for Fortune and set sail up the Yangtze River toward the city of Hangzhou. By the second day on the river, the boatman informed Fortune it was time for him to discard his English clothing and change into his Chinese dress. The coolie motioned for Fortune to sit. He procured a pair of scissors and began clipping the hair from the side and back of Fortune's head. The coolie washed Fortune's head and began to shave the hair down to his scalp with a small razor blade, leaving nothing but a patch of hair at the crown of his head where a fake queue would be sewn to. Fortune wondered if he was the first of his coolie's patients, as he claimed he did not shave, but scraped my poor head until tears came running down my cheeks and I cried out with pain. Attempting to imitate a wealthy merchant, Fortune put on a changsheng, a padded coat, silk robes with wide sleeves and flowing trousers. He reminded himself that from this moment forward he would only be known by his chosen name of Xinghua and could only speak Chinese, no matter how little he knew. As they continued upriver toward Hangzhou, Fortune and his men passed countless sights. One was the Qiying Fu, a walled city large enough to rival Shanghai at the time, home to roughly 270,000 people. In the shallow waters around it floated massive junk boats, many of them serving as full-time homes for the city's inhabitants. About 40 miles west, they reached China's third largest freshwater lake, Chiaihao. The lake was shallow, but its surface was dotted with a plant Fortune had only ever seen in his books, Trappa bicornis, the water chestnut. If you've never seen this plant, you should look it up. Its seed pods look uncannily like a bull's head, complete with horns. Among the floating fields of water chestnut, Fortune watched women and boys paddling around in what he described as common washing tubs, collecting the fruit with such ease and precision that they never damaged the plants. Their journey continued to the next city, Semunyun, a place notorious for pirates and thieves. The boatmen warned Fortune that someone must stay awake at all times, or something would surely be stolen by morning. As night fell, Fortune tried to sleep, but the atmosphere was unsettling. He told of how, after dark, my servants and the boatmen told stories of celebrated pirates and robbers until they frightened themselves and almost made me believe myself to be in dangerous company. The wind was very high, and as it whistled amongst the ruinous ramparts, the sound was dismal enough. And what added still more to our discomfort, the rain beat through the roof of our boat and kept dripping upon our beds. The coolie stayed inside the cabin to watch over Fortune, while the boatmen guarded the deck. When Fortune awoke, he found all of them fast asleep, and nothing missing. With daylight, they continued upriver. The once flat landscape began to rise into sweeping hills covered in lush greenery, with waterways winding through them like veins. As they approached Hangzhou, the canals grew deeper and wider, crowded with merchant ships coming and going, conducting trades, signaling he was nearing a place of great importance. Fortune was sailing the Jiangyang Yunhu, the oldest and longest artificial river in the world, a water highway with hundreds of rivers branching from it. This canal stretches 1,100 miles from Beijing to Hangzhou. Passing through it was like sneaking through Times Square. Fortune never intended to enter Hangzhou itself. The city was too large, too crowded, too dangerous for a foreigner in disguise. He instructed the boatman to drop him before reaching the city so that he could travel the remaining 11 miles by palanquin to the banks of the Xinjiang River. They moored the boat and slept for the night. The next morning, Wang went out to procure a palanquin and additional coolies for their luggage. A palanquin is essentially a curtained chair mounted on two long poles, the perfect way for Fortune to travel unnoticed. He stepped inside, settled into the seat, and two men lifted the chair onto their shoulders. They moved quickly through the narrow streets. After a mile, Fortune expected the city streets to fall away into countryside. But instead, the buildings grew denser. Something was wrong. He wrote, "For the first time, I began to suspect that my servants were deceiving me, and that I was to pass through the city of Hangzhou after all." He was right. Ahead rose 30-foot walls and a massive gate, the entrance to Hangzhou. It was too late to turn back. He let the chair bearers carry him through the soldier guarded gates. Fortune acknowledged Hangzhou as a place of luxury and wealth. Shops glittered with gold and silver ornaments or expensive jade carvings. Everyone except the lowliest of servants were adorned in silk robes. Fortune's servants informed him that one man can never tell a rich man in Hangzhou, for it is just possible that all he possesses in the world is on his back. In a country suffering from shortages and famine, the people of Hangzhou were healthy and well fed. Suddenly, Fortune's chair-bearers set down the palanquin in the middle of a busy street. Startled, he looked around for Wang and the coolie, but neither was in sight. He was alone, a foreigner in disguise, sitting, exposed in the heart of a bustling city. Then another palanquin was brought to him. Only then did he understand. His original fee had been meant to cover the cost of a second palanquin to take him the rest of the way. But the chair-bearers had spent too much of the money on tea and tobacco. A fight broke out amongst them over the remaining payment, a common enough occurrence in Hangzhou that few people paid attention. Eventually, Fortune intervened, promising the second set of chair-bearers that he would pay the rest upon arrival. They agreed, and the journey continued. Outside the city, the landscape opened into the countryside. For 2 miles, there was nothing but fields and distant hills, and still no sign of Wang or the coolie. Fortune sat alone with chair-bearers whose dialect he could barely understand. The only word he caught was Hongli, the place where they were apparently taking him, though he had no idea what it meant. Fortune felt his palanquin being set down. He looked around, and to his surprise he saw a small inn. Inside he found a large heap of luggage, and moments later Wang and the coolie appeared. Fortune and his servants explained their intent to travel up the Hangzhou River to the innkeeper. Wang and the coolie left with the innkeeper to procure a boat, leaving Fortune alone. He wandered the old inn until he came upon a table of 5 Chinese men. They made room for him, and he hesitantly sat down, worried they might see through his disguise. They offered him a pipe. He took a puff and felt his nerves settle. As dinner approached, hunger gnawed at him, but when the food arrived, panic replaced appetite. He hadn't used chopsticks in over 3 years. One slip, one fumble, and his disguise could be ruined. Better to claim he wasn't hungry than risk exposure. He skipped dinner entirely. Evening came. Wang and the coolie returned with the boatmen. They had secured passage upriver. Fortune followed them to a long, flat-bottomed boat moored at the river bank. They slept aboard it to get an early start up the Xiangshankiang River that carried all green and black tea down to Shanghai. As Fortune boarded, he noticed the sharp, pointed bow and stern, and rows of mats laid 2 deep along the floor with a narrow walkway down the center. He was handed a hard, square pillow, a thin cotton blanket, and was instructed to sleep on the mat closest to the walls, while Wang and the coolie slept near the walkway where the boatmen would pace throughout the night. The next morning, Fortune awoke to someone handing him a hot basin of water and a towel to wash his face, neck, and head. Each passenger received 3 meals a day: kung yi in the morning, rice at noon, and rice kong yi in the evening. Anything extra, even tea, had to be brought and prepared by the passenger. Fortune dressed and received a cup of tea, noting that it was without sugar or milk, these additions never being used in this part of China. A reminder of how differently the British approached tea. Breakfast was served in porcelain bowls and eaten with chopsticks. This time, Fortune didn't care who was watching, and to his surprise, the chopsticks came easily. Looking out from the boat, he watched the boatmen push long bamboo poles against the riverbed to propel the vessel forward. The landscape around him was, in his words, hilly and romantic, covered in a variety of trees. Buddhist temples and pagodas rose above the treetops. Ahead, the river narrowed. The riverbed crept closer to the hull, and at times, Fortune could feel rocks bumping against the flexible bottom of the boat. 40 to 50 miles southwest of Hangzhou, the hills gave way to dramatic stone spires, sharp, vertical formations rising 4,000 feet into the air. Small towns appeared here and there, sparsely populated, unsurprising given how little of the rugged terrain could be cultivated. Fortune observed his fellow passengers, merchants and servants, doing little more than eating, sleeping, and smoking. At one point, a gust of wind blew open the silk curtains of a wealthy merchant's cabin, revealing a man lying on his side, thin and emaciated, wrapped in silk. His head rested on an embroidered pillow. A small lamp flickered beside him, and an opium pipe hung from his mouth. The man inhaled deeply, then sat up with the dazed, drunken expression of someone floating between worlds. Moments later, he sprang to his feet, called for his teapot, and wandered the boat, joking with anyone who would listen. After a while, he took another drink from his teapot and collapsed back onto his mat. His sleep was restless, filled with nightmares that jolted him awake. Each time, he reached for the pipe again. A knot began to form in Fortune's throat as he caught glimpses of other passengers leering at him and whispering when they thought he wasn't looking. The sense of safety he'd felt began to crumble, especially since he remembered seeing the coolie whispering into the ear of one of the boatmen. He called Wang over and asked what was happening. Wang confirmed his worst fears. In pidgin, he said, "That coolie, he too much of fool-o. He have talkie all that men you know belong this country. You more better Cindy he go away. Suppose ye no wanty too much blobby." Despite this unsettling revelation, they continued upriver without incident. As they neared the city of Yinzhou, Fortune saw its walls rising into view, and only a few boats moored in the harbor, a sign of a place with little trade, where vessels traveling to and from Huizhou stopped to rest and gather supplies as they planned to do themselves. Below the city stood a large tiered pagoda. its multiple eaves rising above the treetops. This was the Hulangta, marking the point where two rivers met, one flowing south towards Jiangxi, the other north towards the Great Tea country of Huizhou. Fortune and his men stayed in Yinzhou for 2 days while the boatmen gathered provisions and hired additional hands. During their stay, Wang managed to stir up trouble. After drinking one night, he attempted to pay a debt to a boatman using a bad dollar, a coin he hadn't been able to pawn off anywhere else. The boatman refused it angrily, saying he would have nothing to do with it. Wang stormed off into the city and returned with a bag of copper coins, $1 worth, which he threw down in front of the boatman, demanding to know if that satisfied him. The boatman untied the bag, examined the coins, and declared them mixed and inferior, impossible to use. A crowd gathered as the argument escalated. Eventually, Wang must have persuaded him, because the boatman pocketed the coins, but not without swearing that he would one day have his revenge. After 2 days, they set off again, heading up the northern stream. As they traveled, Fortune spotted what he first thought was a steamboat, but as they drew closer, he realized it was something entirely different. The bow and stern were moored to the shore, and two large wooden wheels with paddles jutted from the sides. A shaft ran through each wheel, lifting a massive mallet and dropping it repeatedly to grind grain. It was a floating mill. The journey grew slower as the rapids increased. In the most treacherous stretches, 15 barefoot men walked along the shore, pulling the boat using ropes tied to the mast, while 6 more pushed off the riverbed with bamboo poles. During these times, Fortune and his servants would leave the boat and climb nearby hills to scout the river ahead. If the rapids were too dangerous, Fortune used the opportunity to search for plants, having his men collect seeds and specimens. On these brief outings, he would collect plants to press and dry for other botanists to observe and dig up whole specimens to water and seal inside the Wardian cases. Fortune collected so many species that there would almost be no more for future explorers to discover on the routes. On October 29th, now 4 months into his expedition, Fortune spent 2 days passing through the towns of Jiangyuan, Jiaxiapu, Kangku, and Shangyiyuan. The surrounding foliage was lush, with beautiful trees and small patches of green tea plants, but one tree stood out above all the rest. About half a mile away rose a 60-foot tall tree, with a trunk straight as a pine and branches drooping like a weeping willow. Fortune, thrilled, ran towards it, only to find it growing behind the wall of an inn. He was tempted to climb the wall, but thought better of it. Instead, he bought food from the innkeeper and struck up a conversation, expressing his admiration for the tree. The innkeeper told him it was a funeral cypress, also known as a weeping cypress. When Fortune asked for seeds, the innkeeper happily obliged. When they reached the next city, Waiping, they stopped to rest behind its massive walls. Most of the boatmen went ashore, and the passengers settled in to sleep. Fortune was drifting off when he felt a hand shaking him awake. It was Wang. He whispered urgently that Fortune must not fall asleep. When Fortune asked why, Wang explained that he had overheard the boatmen plotting revenge for the bad coin incident, and that they intended to drown Fortune and his group in the river that night. The boatmen had gone to gather friends and were waiting for everyone to fall asleep. Fortune didn't know what to think. They were 300 miles from Shanghai, and if something happened, no one in the area would help them. Still, he did as Wang asked and stayed awake, though, after hearing that, who could fall asleep? They kept their eyes fixed on the city gate, illuminated by lanterns. The night was still and quiet. Any unusual sound would be obvious. Then, the gates slowly opened. 12 men carrying lanterns stepped out and began walking toward the boat. Get up, get up! Quick, quick, for here they come, Wang hissed. Fortune leapt up, trying to appear commanding. The foremost man approached and hopped lightly aboard. Lao, what do you want? Fortune's men shouted. The stranger grinned and said he wasn't there for them, then moved on to the next boat. The rest of the lantern bearers followed him into the darkness. Did you see that? Wang said. You would not believe me when I told you they intended to seize and drown us. But had we not been awake and fully prepared, it would have soon been all over with us. Shaken, none of them could rest. Even the other passengers, who pretended to sleep, whispered nervously among themselves. 30 minutes later, the gate opened again. Another group of men approached, this time, the boatmen themselves. Boarding the vessel, they looked at Wang in astonishment. When he explained his fear, they burst into laughter, insisting they had no such intentions. Wang didn't believe them. The boatmen lay down to sleep and told Fortune's group to do the same, but Wang and the coolie refused, convinced the boatmen were pretending. Fortune and his men stayed awake until 3 in the morning, adrenaline keeping them alert. Eventually, the boatman's deep, steady breathing convinced them the danger had passed. The night was quiet, except for the chirping of crickets and the clanking of distant water wheels. Fortune, exhausted, told his men to wake him if anything happened, and finally fell asleep. He awoke to morning light, the smell of food cooking, and the sight of 15 men ashore, pulling the boat through the rapids. Wang and the coolie were fast asleep. Fortune rushed to the helm to catch a glimpse of Wei Ping's walls in the daylight. A place that seemed like a dungeon, dark, gloomy, and full of imagined danger, was simply another ancient city wall like all the others. When he returned to the cabin, his servants were rubbing their eyes. Well, you see, nothing has happened, and we are now under way, some distance from Wei Ping, Fortune said. One servant replied, "Oh, that is all very well, but had we not been on our guard, we should have never lived to see the morning." After months of travel, on October 2nd, Fortune finally reached the border of the green tea district of Huaizhou. Here, guards stopped the boat, requiring all passengers to disembark while they inspected the boatman's papers and cargo. Once inside the district, the river grew so shallow that the boatman ordered everyone to get out and walk. Looking across the landscape, Fortune saw green tea bushes scattered everywhere, interwoven with fields of Indian corn and millet. Along their trek, they arrived at another large town, and by luck, during a holiday. The city was alive with festivities. In a dried up riverbed, a great celebration was underway, with crowds lining the bank to watch. Farther ahead, a theater was packed with people enjoying a performance. The other passengers rushed off with excitement and invited Fortune to join them, but he declined, choosing instead to rest on a patch of grass with Wang and the coolie. They stayed the night in the town. The next morning, the boatman announced that the river ahead was too shallow for a single vessel. The cargo and passengers would need to be split between two boats. As the boatman unloaded the hull, Fortune watched in horror as they pulled out two coffins. The realization that he had been sleeping above two unknown corpses for the entire journey sent a chill through him. The deceased were from the Huaizhou district. Their friends were returning them to their birthplace for burial. Later, while Fortune and Wang were walking through the city scouting for plants, Wang, still shaken by the boatman's earlier threats, made a desperate proposal. He suggested that during one of their stops, he and Fortune should simply leave the boat and never return. Fortune asked what they would do about all their luggage, bedding, and the coolie. Wang, dead serious, said they should abandon it all. Fortune refused immediately. He couldn't leave behind the plants and specimens he had collected. He told Wang, "This plan of yours will not do. If you can leave the boat in an open manner, taking your companion along with you and paying all charges, I have no objection either to go on shore or to hire another boat, but I cannot consent to go away in the manner you propose." Thankfully, this kept Wang from moving forward with his plans. 2 days later, the river became extremely shallow. Only 4 miles from their destination, the town of Tunxi, all passengers chose to get out and walk to speed up the journey. Tunxi was where they would leave the boat entirely. Fortune instructed the coolie to stay behind and bring all their luggage while he and Wang continued ahead. Tunxi was a thriving town, just 20 miles from Huaizhou, and well known for its tea trade. All green tea from the surrounding farms passed through Tunxi on its way to Huangshao. Here, major dealers purchase large quantities of fresh leaves to refine, sort, and blend into batches destined for Shanghai, where foreign merchants like the East India Company would buy them. In Tunxi, Fortune noticed that the steep hills flanking the river opened into a beautiful valley. In the lower ground, tea plants flourished. The soil here, he believed, was a major reason why Huangzhou's green tea was so superior. After an hour in Tunxi, Fortune hired a palanquin and began the 9-mile journey to Songlo and Xiunyan. He arrived just before nightfall, and there, for the first time, he saw the hill where green tea was said to have been discovered, Sung Lo Shan. The tea grown here, Sung Lo tea, is still produced today on the same mountain. It was one of the teas the East India Company was famous for, and 60 half chests of it were dumped into the Boston harbor during the Boston Tea Party. Though rare and often counterfeited in Fortune's time, it has since returned to production. I will leave a link in the show notes of suppliers for anyone who is interested in trying this variety. In Shunyan, Fortune began studying everything: the soil quality, the elevation, the minerals in the crumbling rocks, the climate, how seeds were germinated, how saplings were placed and transplanted. He was doing exactly what he had been sent to do, and doing it with precision. Before visiting their first tea factory, Wang went ahead to ask the superintendent for permission to tour the facility. The superintendent agreed, and when Fortune arrived, he led them into a large building with gray stucco walls. The walls opened into a courtyard filled with workstations and storerooms, the air thick with the scent of green tea. The manufacturing of green tea proved far more complex than simply drying leaves. It began with spreading freshly picked leaves on large ventilated surfaces, as wide as kitchen tables, to sunbake for 1 to 2 hours. From there, the leaves were roasted in a large wok, kept in constant motion to break down cell walls and draw the resins to the surface. The cooked leaves were tossed onto a table and rolled with bamboo rollers, squeezing out oils until the table was streaked with green juices. By this point, the leaves had curled tightly and shrunk to a quarter of their original size. A pound of fresh leaves carried in baskets on the pickers' backs was reduced to only a handful. The rolled leaves were returned to the wok for a second roasting, then spread out again to be sorted. The tightest, most perfectly rolled leaves were selected for the highest quality teas. The rest were sold as lesser grades. The fine teas use only the two topmost leaves and the youngest buds, the parts with the most delicate and refreshing flavor. Workers picked through the leaves by hand, removing stems, bits of debris from the factory floor, and even insects. Tea was by no means a clean product, and it's why Chinese drinkers often discarded the first cup, saying, "The first cup is for your enemies." As Fortune observed the final stages of processing, he noticed the workers' hands were stained bright blue. Ever since his first trip to China, he and many in Britain had suspected that Chinese manufacturers dyed their teas. He watched as workers ground Prussian blue into a fine powder. At the same time, gypsum was heated until soft, then crushed into dust. The two powders, 4 parts gypsum to 3 parts Prussian blue, were mixed into a pale blue pigment. This mixture was sprinkled over the green tea leaves 5 minutes before they were removed from the roasting pans. Workers then turned the leaves by hand to distribute the dye evenly. Fortune remarked, "If any tea drinkers had been present during the operation, their taste would have been corrected." When he asked why the tea was dyed, manufacturers admitted the tea would be better left natural, and that they never drank the dyed tea themselves. But foreign markets believed the blue-green color signaled higher quality, so it fetched higher prices. Fortune calculated that a European or American who drank this tea regularly likely consumed more than an ounce of Prussian blue and gypsum each year. After spending days studying the tea-making process in Shunyan, Fortune traveled to Songlo, where Wang invited him to stay at his father's home. The house was a small, rickety 2-story building. The windows were covered with lattice wood screens, keeping out birds but not vermin or insects. The building was shared by 4 families, 2 upstairs, 2 downstairs, making the space feel cramped. For the first 3 days, rain kept Fortune trapped indoors. At mealtimes, each family cooked in their own small kitchen. With no chimney or ventilation, the house filled with smoke until it was nearly unbearable, stinging Fortune's eyes and bringing him to tears. On the fourth day, the rain stopped, the clouds parted, and Fortune wasted no time. He spent every hour, from dawn to dusk, collecting seeds and young plants, absorbing everything he could about tea cultivation and processing. After a week, he had gathered enough seeds and specimens to send back to Europe. It was time to arrange transport. The coolie, noticing Wang timidly around boatmen, tried to extort him for more money, demanding $4. But now that Wang was home, surrounded by his own people, he refused to be squeezed any further. He declared he would find help among his countrymen instead. An hour later, he returned empty-handed. While Wang was running around, his father arranged a boat and returned with a contract for transport to Neizhou, including 3 meals a day and work hands. Wang took it upon himself to translate the contract. The price came out to $24. By now, Fortune learned the rhythms of Chinese bargaining. He had repeatedly paid more than locals for the same service, and now he had only $30 left. He suspected Wang was inflating the price. Fortune told him plainly that he didn't believe the contract was accurate and would not pay it. He would either find his own transport or seek help from the Mandarin of Tunxi, or even from the coolie. Wang protested, but Fortune cut him off and walked away. It worked. Within minutes, a defeated Wang returned and asked how much Fortune was willing to pay. Fortune replied, "What is the use of you asking this question? You tell me you have engaged a boat for $24. If I take the boat, I must of course pay this sum. If not, I only forfeit the bargain money which you say you have paid." Wang insisted, "Never mind that. Tell me what sum you can pay, and then we shall see whether it's sufficient or not." They eventually agreed. $10 would get them from Tunxi to Neizhou, and another 5 would take them to Ningpo. Once in Ningpo, Fortune had the contract translated by someone other than Wang, and discovered the original price had been $5. Wang had pocketed $10 off the deal. On the afternoon of November 20th, Fortune hired a palanquin for the journey to Tanxi, while the coolie carried all the luggage and warning cases. The day was miserable, cold, rainy, and windy. The rain blew into the palanquin, soaking Fortune despite his oiled paper coverings. The men carrying him wore similar paper garments, but they too were drenched. As the sun set, the road grew treacherous. At one point, one of the carriers slipped on the wet ground. Had the other man not held tight, Fortune would have been thrown over a cliff into the river below. Soon, the lights of Tanxi twinkled into view. As they entered its narrow streets, Fortune instructed the chair-bearers to set him down in front of a tea-house so he could wait for Wang and the coolie to catch up. The chair-bearers went inside to get refreshments, leaving Fortune alone. A few minutes passed. Then Wang suddenly appeared, breathless and wide-eyed. "Come away! Be quick! Leave the chair where it is and let us hurry onward." Startled, Fortune leapt from the palanquin, assuming something must be terribly wrong. They ran a few yards when he glanced back and saw the chair-bearers chasing after them. They caught up, grabbed Wang by the collar, and demanded their fare. Fortune was serious. He had already given Wang the money to pay them. Where was it now? Wang whispered urgently, "Do not make any noise. I will account for the money afterwards, but give me some more now to get rid of these men." Reluctantly, Fortune handed over more money, and the chair-bearers left. When Fortune confronted Wang, Wang explained that he had seen another palanquin approaching, one carrying a great general, who he insisted was coming to seize them. Fortune kept a watchful eye out for this mysterious general, but no such person ever appeared. That night, in Tanxi, they boarded their boat and slept in the rain-soaked clothes. Morning brought a clear sky, and with the rainfall raising the water level, they traveled faster than expected, passing between mountains towering 3,000 feet above the river. The faster pace brought new dangers. Large rocks lurked beneath the surface, ready to tear the boat apart if they struck one at speed. Each night, the boatmen tied the vessel to the bamboo pole and waited for daylight. One night, after they tied up, Fortune was jolted awake by a violent gust of wind that blew his door open and nearly tore the roof off. Another gust ripped the boat free from its bamboo anchor. Now adrift in darkness, surrounded by unseen rocks, they were in real danger. Chaos erupted. Men shouted orders that no one followed. Some tied the roof to the hull with ropes, while others tried to push the boat back towards the shore with bamboo poles. After a frantic struggle, they managed to run the boat aground and reach safety. Within 6 days, they arrived in Neizhou, a journey that had taken more than 12 days going upstream. As Fortune sat down to dinner, he heard a sudden roar of water. People in nearby boats began shouting, "Zhang Shui! Zhang Shui!" meaning the flood tide, the flood tide. Fortune jumped up in time to see a massive wave barreling towards them, carrying boats along with it. It surged forward, then calmed just before reaching them. At last, he had witnessed the great tidal bore of the river, a force locals had spoken of with awe. From Neizhou, they left their boats and secured another to take them to Xiaowu. From there, they walked a mile to the city of Pahuan, a place filled with eating houses and tea shops, a rest stop for weary travelers. As Fortune entered the city walls, he was immediately recognized as a foreigner, but no one seemed to care. Clearly, many foreigners passed through Pahuan. Here, at last, Fortune could procure a boat to Ningpao without relying on his servants. Once in Ningpao, he hired a boat to take them to Silver Island, a long, narrow island between Chushan and the mouth of the Ningpao River. Fortune heard that during the English occupation, the island was rarely visited because Mandarins who offended the government were banished there. Its name suggested wealth and importance, but when Fortune arrived, he found only small, poor villages. The people, however, were extraordinarily kind. They welcomed him into their homes and offered him tea, which he now found far more refreshing without the milk and sugar the English insisted on adding. What the island lacked in riches, it made up for in beauty. Fortune climbed the hills and discovered a valley dotted with small farmhouses and, more importantly, tea farms. Day after day, Fortune and his servants rode on horseback into the valley, returning with large quantities of tea seeds until they visited every farm. Once satisfied with his collection, Fortune left Silver Island and made his way back to Shanghai. It was now January, and Shanghai was bustling, full of foreign buyers and merchants. It is considered bad luck to begin the new year in debt, so merchants often sold their goods at discounted prices, and foreign traders knew it. As Fortune walked the streets, he noticed flower shops overflowing with blooms that were wildly out of season. Magnolias, double-blossom peaches, camellias, and most striking of all, the Mutan peony, its pink petals brightening the cold winter air. Fortune realized Chinese gardeners didn't have the glass houses or tools used in England. They must have forced these plants into blooming using their homes and sheds, heating them with coal fires, spending countless hours in hot, humid rooms, tending to the flames day and night. Before leaving Shanghai, Fortune established his headquarters at the Fa Tea Gardens, managed by Dent & Co., one of the most powerful British merchant firms in China. From there, he wrote to the East India Company, "I have much pleasure to inform you that I have procured a large supply of seeds and young plants which I trust will get safely to India." In the gardens, Fortune approached an elderly seed supplier and asked if he could watch the entire packing process, as he was told Chinese merchants boiled or poisoned seeds before shipping them so foreign countries couldn't grow Chinese prize plants. The old man agreed. "Sit down," he said. "I will explain the business to you. I first gathered the seeds from the plants. I put them into one of these small bottles and then packed the whole into a little box ready for being shipped to Europe or America." Fortune understood that part, but he didn't understand the white ashy substance the seeds were packed in. He assumed it was burnt bone, but when he asked, the old man replied, "Burnt lice." "Burnt what?" Fortune said, smiling in disbelief. It turned out to be the burnt husk of rice, reduced to ash. Without this powder, tiny maggots burrowed into the seeds and consumed them. This, Fortune realized, was why so many seeds failed to germinate after shipping. Not boiling, not poisoning, but maggots. Fortune was adamant that Dent & Co. shipped the plants quickly. He spent every day in the gardens replanting, packing, labeling, and overseeing the workers. In total, 13,000 young plants and 10,000 green tea seeds were prepared for shipment to the Himalayas. As a precaution, Fortune divided the cargo among 4 different ships so that if disaster struck one, the others might survive. He went a step further and boarded the cargo ship himself, escorting the plants all the way to Hong Kong before sending them onward. From there, he had no control. It could be months before he heard anything. The plants could arrive destroyed, and he would have to repeat the entire mission. He instructed the East India Company to send any letters to Dent and Co., who would forward them to wherever he might be. But once the plants left port, something went wrong. Instead of sailing directly to Calcutta, the cargo ship detoured to Ceylon before turning back towards India. On March 23rd, 2 months after leaving Hong Kong, the specimens finally arrived in Calcutta and were handed over to Hugh Falconer, a botanist employed by the East India Company. Falconer oversaw their transfer to a steamship bound for Allahabad. When the plants arrived on April 12th, a high-ranking official did the unthinkable. In his excitement, he opened every warden case to check on the plants. He proudly reported that they had arrived in healthy condition, but the plants still had a long journey ahead, and the Ganges was dry. They sat in Allahabad for 6 more weeks until the monsoon rains filled the river. Only then were they loaded onto another ship and sent toward the Himalayas. When William Jameson, head of the company's botanical outpost, opened the Wardian cases, what he saw was heartbreaking. Of the 13,000 plants, only 1,000 were alive, and even those were covered in mold and fungus. Jameson did everything he could to save them, but in the end, only 3% survived, and not a single seed germinated. Fortune's first mission was a failure, and he was none the wiser. Thank you for joining me on Botanical Echoes. In the next episode, still believing his first shipment succeeded, Fortune heads deep into the mountains of Wu Yi for the secrets of black tea. If you hear any echoes of your own, questions, reflections, or stories, send them my way at botanicalechoes@gmail.com.